Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so have you ever wanted to start composting, but honestly just felt completely overwhelmed by all the conflicting advice out there? People talk about carbon to nitrogen ratios, internal temperatures, and microbial activity like you need a literal chemistry degree just to toss an apple core into the yard. But today, we're going to completely reframe the entire process. We're going to treat composting not as some complex science experiment, but as an accessible, step-by-step recipe. It's a recipe you can easily follow right at home to transform your daily kitchen scraps and yard waste into incredibly rich soil. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our recipe for today. 1. The beginner's compost bin. 2. Greens, browns, and ratios. 3. What not to compost. 4. Assembling your first pile. 5. Moisture, turning, and maintenance. And finally, 6. The final harvest. See? 6 simple steps. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Isn't this going to be a huge, smelly mess? And you know what? It's a totally valid concern. But I can promise you, if you simply follow the recipe we're laying out today, you'll have a foolproof, odor-free method. A bad smell is really just your compost pile's way of telling you that you've missed a step in the recipe. Follow the steps, and your pile will literally smell like fresh, damp earth. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the intricate food web inside the pile. Because when you compost, you aren't actually doing the breaking down. You are simply setting up the kitchen for these microscopic chefs. We've got primary consumers like bacteria, fungi, and actinomycetes doing the heavy lifting, actually generating heat as they digest. Then you have the physical decay agents, the millipedes, sow bugs, and earthworms, chopping up the debris. Your only job, just give them the right environment to thrive. Step 1. The beginner's compost bin. So let's establish your kitchen, right? When you're setting up your very first bin, the magic numbers to remember are 3 to 5. You want a cylindrical or cubical mass that is about 3 to 5 feet wide and high. Why this specific size? Well, if you go any smaller than 3 feet, the pile simply won't generate enough insulation to create the heat necessary for rapid breakdown. But if you go larger than 5 feet, the mass restricts air and water from penetrating into the center, and that suffocates all those helpful microbes we just talked about. Location is also absolutely key. You want to place your bin close to where you'll actually use it, but kind of tucked out of the way. The ideal spot receives partial sunlight to help heat the pile, but is shielded from heavy, drying winds. For your very first structure, just keep it simple. A portable wood and wire bin is an excellent, super flexible option for first-timers. It keeps your yard looking neat, stops materials from blowing away, and it's incredibly easy to just pull apart and move when it's time to turn the pile. Step 2. Greens, browns, and ratios. All right, now that we have our bin set up, it's time to gather the raw ingredients. This is all about finding the fundamental balance needed to make the recipe actually work. In the composting world, this is the golden rule. We are aiming for roughly 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen by weight. Microorganisms digest carbon as their main energy source, and they ingest nitrogen as their protein source. If your ratio is way too high in carbon, decomposition slows to an absolute crawl. But if it's too high in nitrogen, it turns into ammonia gas and creates terrible odors. But don't worry, you don't need a scale to figure this out. You just need to know your greens and your browns. Consider this table your mental cheat sheet. Greens are your fresh, moist nitrogen sources. This includes fruit and veggie scraps from your kitchen, coffee grounds, and fresh grass clippings. Browns are your dry, coarse carbon sources. Think dry leaves, shredded black and white newspaper, straw, and sawdust. Most things you have laying around won't fit that perfect 30-to-1 ratio on their own, which is exactly why blending items from these two columns together is the secret to a fast, hot pile. Step 3. What not to compost. Before we mix our greens and browns, we absolutely have to address the ingredients that will ruin your recipe. I literally cannot emphasize this list enough. You must keep these strict do-nots out of your beginner bin. Meat, bones, grease, cheese, whole eggs, and dairy. They will rot, smell awful, and act as a massive magnet for rodents and other unwanted animals. Pet feces? That can transmit dangerous diseases. And heavily diseased or insect-infested weeds might actually survive the composting process if your pile doesn't get hot enough, meaning you'll just spread those problems right back into your garden later. Just stick to the safe plant-based greens and dry browns. Step 4. Assembling your first pile. All right, we have our ingredients. To assemble this from the ground up, you want to build it in a very specific sequence, literally just like building a layer cake. Step 1. Lay down a fluffy 6-inch layer of your chopped and shredded browns, like dead leaves. Step 2, add a 2-inch layer of your greens, like your veggie scraps and coffee grounds. Step 3, top that off with a 2-inch layer of regular garden soil or finished compost. Why soil? Because it acts as a kickstarter, introducing millions of decomposing microbes right into the mix, and it serves as a natural odor barrier. Water each layer lightly so it's damp, and then just repeat the sequence until your pile is about 3 to 5 feet high.
Step 5. Moisture, turning, and maintenance.
This is the baking and stirring phase, and honestly, it's where most beginners get a little intimidated, so let's simplify it. Once you build that layer cake, the microbes get to work. A healthy, active pile will physically heat up to somewhere between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. If you touch the surface, it will literally feel hot. This incredible natural heat is exactly what you want, because it effectively cooks and kills off plant pathogens and weed seeds, all while rapidly breaking down your scraps. But, those microbes need the right amount of water to keep the furnace burning. How much water? Forget measuring cups. Just use the squeeze test. Put on a gardening glove, reach right into the pile, grab a handful of material, and squeeze it tightly. It should feel exactly like a wrung-out damp rag. If it's too dry, the microbes die off, and you need to add a bit of water. If water is pouring out of it, it's way too wet, and you need to add dry, brown materials to soak it up.
And this brilliantly illustrates the science of why oxygen is so absolutely crucial. We want aerobic decomposition, which means the microbes are working with plenty of oxygen. That is what produces that great earthy smell, carbon dioxide, and heat. If the pile is too dense, too wet, or too big, you get anaerobic decomposition. That means no oxygen, which leads to slow rotting and very, very bad odors. So how do we guarantee our pile stays aerobic? We stir the pot. Simply turn the pile, just once or twice a month, using a pitchfork. As the center of the pile naturally cools down over time, turning it takes all that uncomposted material on the outside and buries it right back into the hot center. But more importantly, it fluffs everything up, creating air spaces and injecting fresh oxygen right back to those microbes so the breakdown stays rapid and completely odor-free. Step 6, the final harvest. So how do you actually know when your recipe is fully baked and ready to serve to the garden? You don't need a lab test. You just use your senses. If you've been maintaining your pile during the warm season, look for it to be ready in about 2 to 4 months. You'll notice the overall volume of the pile has dramatically shrunk, probably to about half of its original height. The center won't be hot anymore. And when you grab a handful, it won't look like banana peels and leaves. It'll crumble easily when squeezed, look dark brown, and smell pleasantly like fresh dirt. The payoff for this entire process is absolutely massive. No matter what kind of yard you have, mixing just 1 to 2 inches of this finished compost into your topsoil works wonders. If you've got heavy clay soil, the compost physically breaks it apart, improving drainage and letting roots breathe. If you have light, sandy soil where water just drains right through, the compost acts like a giant sponge, drastically increasing moisture and nutrient retention. It is literally the ultimate natural soil fixer. So, we've walked through the recipe. You've seen the correct ratio of greens to browns, you know the exact layer-by-layer assembly, and you've got that simple squeeze test to keep it thriving. Are you ready to start turning your daily kitchen scraps into black gold? Grab a bin, gather up those dead leaves and coffee grounds, and let those microbes get to work. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, happy composting!